Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third installment of the Cannabis Tech Audit series. I'm joined today by three familiar panelists, David, Dom, and Rachel. And if you're familiar with our series, they are our existing panelists, our experts in the field. And today we have brought on a special guest, Joel Dickerson. He is the CEO of GPS One, a technology platform designed to eliminate operational efficiencies, improve logistics coordination within the cannabis industry. He is also a partner at Green Parcel Service, the nation's first licensed B2B cannabis transportation company, which remains active in Colorado today. Joel, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And yes, welcome to the rest of our panelists. I will bow out here and let our fearless moderator, David, tee it off.
This questioner. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, we're really glad to be doing this tech audit series, and as we've gone through it, we've started to see some of the common themes emerging. What's really exciting about today is we get a lot more into the practical application piece of it around logistics. It does such a great job at that, and today we've got Joel really understanding how all those variations in logistical planning really culminate in cost and opportunity pieces, and really hard to balance them all. Rachel's continue to help us understand, hey, how do these different processes work in terms of standard solutions, and how do those relate to different systems we have? And of course, Dom here helping us to really keep a very clear relationship between a strategic goal, what we plan to do, and how those operationally work. And hidden cost is a very dynamic challenge across businesses, and I'd say you could look at it from a number of different ways. Well, we have three different perspectives here, so let me go around the group here. Joel, if you were gonna to frame the challenge here, how would you in a phrase?
Sure. Yeah. For me, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we see in operations is that, if the system is working, then the numbers must be working right as well. But in reality, sometimes those systems can be working as designed, but can still produce inaccurate margins because they don't capture the full operational picture. I feel like a lot of times this happens in cannabis because the industry grew so rapidly and the technology solutions were built more for pain points rather than for, standard operational frameworks. And, when that happens, the margins can leak and the complexity of the business exceeds what the system was designed to measure, which, can cause trouble understanding what your actual costs are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to that point, when you talk about it leaking and the margins being hit by that, what happens when we are seeing these non-standard solutions, that things are not founded on standard solutions, is that your system is working exactly as it was described to you, exactly as implemented, exactly as designed, and therefore the cost that you are leaking becomes hidden. The technology's piece in that cost becomes hidden because you're not seeing the way that those costs are building up since the system is functioning as expected.
And I appreciate, Joel leading us off there with, the digital and physical process. I think we left last time with Rachel and I bouncing ideas off of, the tech systems and the data versus process here. But also super biased, just having spent a lot of time learning how the lack of integrations within cannabis, we have up here fragmented tools, but what that really says is if, particularly if I'm vertically integrated, why can't my point of sale and wholesale and my compliance all be in synchronization? And to Joel's point, as the industry went through this rapid growth, the business models change in different markets. And so your ability to have, centralization of workflows, most, corporate 500 businesses have shared centralized back office, but a lot of the times the tooling and the lack of integrations end up having operators abandoning tools or having to replicate the same operational labor to get insights from their business. And so, from the tech and data side, really, we really see this highlighting. Tech fragmentation just means the tools don't talk to each other. So what do? I apply a spreadsheet process to make sure that things are in sync. And when you're moving fast, particularly with 420 around the corner, sometimes you just throw bodies at a tech problem.
Yeah, that especially, as 420 comes up, that is really common here. A little plug. Last month we actually dove into some of what Dom's talking about in terms of that fragmentation, how that occurred and how that evolved over time. I think that one's really worth checking out. It's from February 24th. But so Joel, when we prepped for this conversation, I was fascinated by the examples you gave that said, here's how people think about the challenge of logistics. Here's what's really going on. Can you give us some of those examples or one of them?
Sure. Yeah. In my space, much like a lot of the spaces within the cannabis industry, you see a lot of price compression and everybody thinking that, a delivery cost is just, essentially a driver in a vehicle. And, just because, somebody can provide a cheaper cost per delivery, that doesn't mean that it's actually a cheaper solution in the long run. I've seen this firsthand a number of times over the years. We've built our tech stack out to really positively impact our customers, and which kind of has a downstream impact for us as well. But a lot of those efficiencies were built on the ground floors of the product manufacturers and the grows. But what's happens is when somebody makes a switch away from us into a cheaper option, what they don't understand is that because the cheaper option is not as well organized, they haven't been doing it as long as we have. There's just a number of different things and factors that can kind of play into that. But the operational issues start, and then you start missing deliveries. Then you start having poor communication, disruptions with the retail partners where they're not happy with your delivery service. And, that's where the real costs start to show up, right? Because now you're starting to impact your customers. Your team is having to spend more time trying to remanifest orders, get things out that have been rejected. And even to the point where, in this one example, they were looking at hiring another employee, which was going to cost them between $45,000 and $50,000. And if, in this scenario, the savings of $40,000 actually ended up being a net loss of, roughly $15,000 to $20,000. So, even though the bottom line looked cheaper and the overall cost looked cheaper initially, it became more expensive. And eventually they ended up switching their provider back to us because they understood that, the value that we were providing through our tech stack was worth the additional $40,000 a year that they were paying in deliveries.
Really appreciate you touching on the net side of that, Joel. I think everybody can jump at saying 40, 50, but then when you really true it up, there's an impact to the bottom line. A lot of the cannabis tech platforms today, particularly in the wholesale place, make it really complicated to track gross to net sales. So, I produced a product for X, I want to sell it for Y, but then I had things like a discount, a trade credit, a promotion that don't always live in that actual system. And so as we were getting ready for this, one that's near and dear to our heart right now, particularly for how we think about data normalization at CannaHub, it's the default today in a lot of markets where I'll sell wholesale products to my retailer. And when I sell that over, maybe the product's stealing, I want to run a promotion to try and, increase sell-through at retail. More often than not, because of how point of sale systems are set up, rather than actually tracking the promotional period, what the retailers are asking their wholesale sales teams to do is say, hey, after we're done with this period, we're going to send a credit back. And on the next wholesale order that you send us, just take that credit amount and apply it as an order discount on our next wholesale order, which on its face, pretty operational, but think about the time spent for somebody to export all of their, sales, identify the promotions and, get that report, send it over to the sales team who's now ensuring that they're tracking that credit as they're now creating the next wholesale order. But what I've talked about here is two distinct periods that sometimes fall in the same month, sometimes could be months separate. And from a traditional finance GAAP accounting perspective, now I'm looking at an order discount for units in this current week when the actual promotion was implicating the net volume of the net sales of my wholesale order from the previous period. So whenever I'm trying to run my month over month, revenue volume or my customer mix, because of this process, I've now increased the labor that goes into just managing the actual data. But I've also created a conflicting reality of, well, where did my actual promotion get applied? Is my SKU, my edible SKU from period A, the right discount, or am I applying to a concentrate SKU in period B?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
that's
also,
extremely challenging to have those completely split. You literally can't gain visibility. Sorry, Rich, but
no worries. Yeah, I was thinking about this. And so back to kind of what Joel was talking about as well, what was that kind of triggered for me is oftentimes what we're also seeing, because I'm always looking at the process side of things, is that when you're looking at the way your technology works, you are also looking at the negative space. And a lot of times we miss that negative space. So for example, if you are changing your logistics software or your logistics partner, et cetera, and now you have to move up your order cutoff time, or your order cutoff time has to be 24 hours or 48 hours ahead of time, then you start to lose out on additional sales. You start to lose out on your customer relationship if the orders show up late or if the orders show up wrong. And so a lot of times when we're looking at the cost of technology in these disconnected systems, we're not just looking at the direct cost that we can track in terms of hours, like Don was talking about, hours being spent pulling reports and spreadsheets to be able to get a better understanding, but also in terms of the negative space of what are we losing out on, what are the opportunity costs, what are the relationship costs in the way that our technology is currently functioning for us, even when it's functioning exactly as intended.
yeah. Yeah, Joel, your example, just how do you really quantify, especially when it impacts the relationship with the customer? How do you quantify the cost of that? It's kind of nuts. And as we prep for this, we were starting to think of, well, let's make sure we're all on the same page in terms of how we think about those costs. Opportunity cost is one of those, but then just from more standard approach, Dom, you kind of taught me to think of these in terms of these buckets here. Why don't you help us get on the same page in the terms?
Yeah. So as finance teams are sort of, running, your typical, operational look back, a lot of times, again, from a data normalization perspective, I think it's very uncommon in cannabis for finance or accounting teams to really categorize, all of their operating expenses in a monthly period based off of fixed and variable costs. And so, again, having spent a lot of time with Joel, and the supply chain side of it, if you're a transport provider, you make money through revenue on the road. And so as you're picking up deliveries and dropping those off, you have, fixed costs of operation. And that's your building. So where your cross stock, where you're storing products, it is things like your monthly lease for all the vehicles in your fleet. Even things as we get into more labor, where I have, salaried employees versus hourly employees. Specifically this example, as I'm making a delivery, to Rachel's point about opportunity costs and where those things get lost. Let's say for whatever reason, I have a driver on the route, and at the point of delivery, now I have to do some amount of rework. Well, I've just increased my variable cost because I've now delayed my driver from actually going and completing the rest of their deliveries. And when you're in the supply chain side of it, you already have this fixed cost, the vehicle's out the road. So what you're really trying to do is maximize the profitability on a fixed cost amount. But without really understanding how a lot of the tech systems line up, again, the efficiency that you can lose in that process is jarring, and things like rework, things as simple as re-entering metric manifest data. Again, from that supply chain experience. Well, if I'm reworking metric manifest data, do I have another tag that's a variable cost? I'd have to re-tag things. Do I have to tear up my previous metric manifest because most states haven't gotten to digitizing their actual transfer receipts? So now I got to rip up 3 pieces of paper or 300 pieces of paper just because I didn't have the data lined up, or I have to rework or mismanage. And so coming back to it really is categorizing those monthly expenses of, what does it take you for every dollar of revenue? How much of that is impacting my variable cost? Do I have to throw more labor just to get product out the door?
Yeah. And because we have Joel here today, using that logistics example is so fantastic, because also, like in that example, they tried to reduce their fixed costs. So this will be great. This will be a total win. No visibility though to what that's going to do to their variable costs, and it really not only destroys their goal, but it actually moves it in the opposite direction. But Joel, variable costs can only be so variable, right? I mean, tell us about fuel costs, for example.
Yeah. Thanks, Dom, for kind of explaining those fixed costs and those variable costs. In our business on the transport side, you deal with a lot of variable costs, a lot more variable costs than you do with fixed costs. Some of those variable costs, yeah, fuel is a good example. Labor, maintenance, vehicle mileage, and all these things scale with your operations. But when you're trying to figure out what how you're going to price your product and how we price our deliveries, taking a look at these national gas prices really gives you an idea of how difficult it can be for us to plan for those things. In some of these months, we see a $2,500 swing from one month to another. Sometimes it's from a more expensive rate to a lower rate. Sometimes it's a lower rate to a more expensive rate. And here in February into March, we're looking at a potential $3,000 increase just because of the increase in the fuel cost in the past 30 days. And so what that means for me, is if it's a $3,000 increase, I need to make up at least 60 deliveries from this month to be able to cover that $3,000 increase. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you start adding on all these additional, costs, and as insurance costs rise, and labor costs and things like that, that can become 80 or 100, 120 deliveries a month, and that becomes a little bit more difficult to fill out. So, you know, especially in our space, even efficient operations still experience some cost volatility. But the idea is to make sure that you have a handle on it, to understand it, to be deep in the data, know exactly what your cost is to run a route, how many deliveries you need to have on that route, how many deliveries a driver can make during a day, because all these other, small factors as far as like capacity constraints and route density also will have a pretty major effect on whether or not you're able to complete those routes. Cut back on the errors that are happening and mistakes that are happening while you're on the road, and really hone into what your cost is to run a delivery and how many deliveries you need on that route to become make it a profitable route. So, yeah, the fuel is just one example of many, but it's really
Yeah.
easy to see here why it's important to understand those data points.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, when you put it this way, Joel, it's eye popping. You know, most most operators start out with a plan, and like Mike Tyson says, everybody got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And so as you're thinking about, looking ahead into the future, there's a pretty core financial analysis on, called volume, mix, and rate. And a lot of times, as Joel's kind of touched on here, right, when I think about volume, Joel touched on it, right, as a supply chain operator, it's month over month deliveries, right? What's my volume of deliveries? If you're a manufacturer of concentrates, did my revenue volume go up? And did the quantity of the actual units that I produce also go up in that period? And again, as we're thinking about all of the cost accounts, the operating expenses in a monthly given basis, I have a cost of what it takes to actually drive that revenue. And so if I'm tracking in I had a plan, I said I was going to do, 2,000 deliveries next month or 2,000 units next month. I really need to be able to understand, things like route mix. To Joel's point, hey, are there some routes that don't make sense? Are we leading and lagging? But that same mix analysis can be carried through to every cost account. So going back to things like metric tags and papers, paper reprints or rework, if you understand the volume at the unit level, you're able to take that same principle back down. So when you're looking at units of things like fuel or price compression, discounts in a period, I should be able to respond much quicker than looking at this 12 months in arrears and just being like, wow, that period was really hard. I intuitively felt it, but I didn't have any ability to respond to the pricing pressure or, hey, I'm getting compressed on a specific unit because I didn't have any of my fixed and variable costs really categorized. And again, this is really getting to the core of like tech not necessarily integrating. More often than not, I have to do a finance process in a spreadsheet that's 45 days after the month closes just to get an insight here. And so really thinking about how to speed up that process will drive insights into, hey, maybe there are certain routes or product lines that just don't work for me anymore based off the response of what's happening in the external market.
Yeah, that's actually really, really good. And that really plays into what you were talking about earlier when you were talking about discounts that are given at retail and the way that that works. It's interesting to me that when we look at standard practices and the way that standard practices have been expressed in systems that are not cannabis specific, we see that a lot of this has been accommodated for to allow the reality of what happens in real life as well as what needs to be tracked in multiple layers. So for example, inside of a cannabis POS, if I am using that to track my costs because I'm not putting my costs other places other than at a journal entry level. So my ability to understand kind of that budget versus actual, what my margin was going to be on it by SKU or by product line level. I'm really looking at just my POS because that's the only place I have that level of granularity. All of those key pieces are being tagged. And so if that's what I'm doing, and then what I do is I take I did a BOGO last week because we actually had a client that did this. They had a strain called skunkberry and nobody wanted to smoke skunkberry for some reason. It just didn't translate real well. And so they were trying to move that product off the shelves as fast as they could. So they were sponsoring BOGOs in all the different stores. So the stores would do a buy one, get one, and then they would send over a report and they would give them a discount in order that they wouldn't take the hit for, the product that they were discounting. And of course, that discount was then applied to the next order that the customer made to them. So for that store, if inside of their POS system, they're taking that discount that they're being given and applying it to the next product, Pineapple Express that comes in and is selling really well. All of a sudden, it looks like you've got a huge margin on that Pineapple Express, and it looks like you have just a normal margin on the Skunkberry. And that's actually not true at all. What actually has happened has been the other way around. Your margin on your Pineapple Express was actually pretty normal, and your margin on your Skunkberry only stayed normal because of the discount. In standard solutions, we see this being handled very easily by being handled inside of the financial system. So what happens is my cost of my product comes through. I post my cost of goods sold at every single transaction that occurs. And when I actually post those costs, they are tagged with that SKU. So when I bring in the credit memo from my vendor for the Skunkberry SKU, I actually can apply that against the cost of goods sold for Skunkberry at that SKU level. So when I'm pulling my revenue versus my cost of goods sold inside my financial system, not just inside of my POS system, but inside my financial system where that vendor credit was logged, I'm actually getting a really clear picture. So in situations where in a more standard world where they are using completely integrated or all-in-one solutions and they are following standard practices and those solutions are based on standard practices, we see a lot of this. In cannabis, because of the way that, and we've talked about this in past webinars, but because of the way that things developed inside of cannabis because of lack of access in the past to tech, et cetera. Oftentimes, like you were saying, Dom, we are seeing this being a disconnected system. And then I'm talking to the side of like where there's non-standard solutions. So it's disconnected, it's non-standard. And as a result, your hidden cost is that you're not getting that clear understanding. You're not able to run your expectation versus your reality in any kind of real time. And to your point, Dom, a lot of times you're not even getting costs out of your financial system to reconcile your POS until 45 days after the end of the period. So there's a lot that goes into here, and that creates a lot of negative space. And it is a cost, a true, real cost in the ability to make decisions, in the time of people to do things, and just the ability to respond to market pressures like price compression, like increased cost of supply chain, et cetera, et cetera.
I think it's really important, Rachel. You're highlighting the fact that it's not just like a hidden cost, meaning, oh, we didn't account for this, but it's also a misapplied cost that actually causes you to say, we don't have real clarity on what's happening at all, and we can't make decisions. So if Rach, if we're encountering those kind of challenges, how do we get the reality of our processes to represent themselves? What's the first step, perhaps?
Yeah, so come back to process. I really think it's important to understand your process in your company. I keep coming back to that because it ends up being a big part of the solution for almost every single client we talk to. And again, we come back to the idea that you should set out what your process is in the physical world, disconnected from the system. So like, what is it we are making? What is it we need to track? What are all of our key points of indicating good, bad, et cetera, as well as just what is our actual action? That will help disconnect you from assuming that your process has to be a certain way because tech only allowed a certain thing for you in the past. And then will help you understand how to apply tech better for your company. It'll also, I've noticed that when you sit down and do the actual work of writing out and documenting your process from start to finish, not just work instructions of how to use this technology, but the entire thing from start to finish, including what people are doing in the real world, you do start to see places where, oh, so-and-so is pulling 7 reports to be able to do their next thing. Or, oh, wait, we are losing out on X number of hours of order time because we have to move up our cutoff because of our logistics. All of those types of pieces actually do start to show up when you take this time to sit down and write it out. It has a lot of other benefits around change initiatives, et cetera, but it does have a foundational benefit of helping you truly understand what it's costing your company to do the work, not just in terms of cost, like paying dollars for goods, but also in terms of your technology and the actions your team are being paid to take every single day.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great approach is you get your physical world and your technical world working together. And then Joel, just want to weigh in on what's the first step towards getting there, making those kind of changes?
Yeah. For me, I think this is where, leadership really matters. At the end of the
As
day, operations don't improve unless, leadership is willing to make those changes. One of the biggest challenges that we see with operators in our space is that they get really comfortable with how things are done. Even when there are inefficiencies and even when there are problems and, the system is working well enough so nothing changes. And a part of that comes from experience. A lot of operators have, you know, tried technology solutions in this space that haven't worked in the past. Um, and there are didn't fit their initial operation, so it didn't solve their real problems, and now they're frustrated about trying something new. But the reality is the industry is evolving. The technology is getting better. It's becoming more aligned with how operators actually work, and it's starting to solve all the right problems. So, for me, I think leadership has to be willing to reevaluate those decisions and be able to progress and to grow. And just because it didn't work a few years ago doesn't mean that there's not a right solution today. And so that's, kind of where my point is, lead the change. Don't wait
Yeah.
for the market to force it. Don't wait until the inefficiencies become major problems. Be proactive and find new solutions that work well for your business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's critical. All right, this is my favorite part. Absolutely practical application in 1 minute. But yeah, Dom, your thoughts.
Yeah, I've already touched on the volume mix rate analysis. So volume again is revenue in units, mix is your product line, your customers, your brands, your market, and rate is really what did I actually sell it for? Uh, as we touched on the fixed and variable costs, and as we were particularly talking about the variable costs in here, to Rachel's point about documentation, honing in on things that are what I'll consider right side of the decimal place. So, what are the things that really cost you 10 cents when you're doing 100,000 of those really start to add up? We touched on this paper example earlier. That's something where, in a real world example, converting a $2,500 a month paper cost into a $500 a month fixed cost can drive 17% to the bottom line immediately. And so, again, going back to this budget versus plan versus, do I have a forecast? Really, there's, the market. I think the thing that gets lost in translation is just markets are dynamic. And so as things like external pressures like gas prices change, ensuring that you have both a quarterly or a monthly risk and opportunity to evaluate what you did and look at the small things, look at the units that actually are driving some of the variable costs and understand if there's ways of converting those into more steady, more fixed costs that can actually really support your business.
Joel, what's the broad stroke you could take right now?
One of our kind of core philosophies at Great Parcel Service and at GPS One has been, reducing human touch points. Because every time a human interacts with the process, you introduce risk. And for us, those risks can be delays, inconsistencies, miscommunication, data errors. And Dom touched on some of these. And we see this all the time in what we do with the companies who are utilizing our software tools correctly, and the ones who are still stuck. And we provide service to all these customers, but there are different ways to skin the cat, as they say. And when our customers aren't doing things by the book or with the way that we'd like to have them done, you see scheduling mistakes and, people who are tracking things incorrectly and really not honing in on the tools that are there for them to make their businesses more efficient. And so really reducing those human touch points are really important to us and is really proven out over time to be a very consistent way to do things and has created a lot of a higher level of service, for us to be able to say, hey, I'm going to be there on this day on time. Your deliveries are going to get there. We're not going to have these problems. And a lot of that is because we have reduced so many of those human touch points and automated so much of it that, it's just reduced a lot of our errors and created a lot of efficiency.
I'm going to come back with what I always say, which is document, 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 document. Listen, it doesn't cost you anything extra in subscription costs. It is good for your company in so many ways. It will highlight all the things that everyone on this call is talking about, and it will also give you a point of reference to refer back to as you make changes. So it is something that you can do today that costs you the time that you will take to do it, and it's something that your company can use as a tool going into the future and build on. And if you continue to maintain it, it will absolutely serve your company really, really well for a very long time to come. Again, no extra subscription cost for it.
Thanks, Rachel. Really appreciate the last bit of insight there. Dom, we had a question pop up from a guest for you from Andrew Rexroad. Dom, do you recommend brands mandate a standard approach for trade credit applications, or must operators plan to normalize across the various modes of retailer preference for trade credit application? Is there a best practice the industry should adopt, or does state-specific regulation influence this preference?
That's a really great question. My dear friend Rachel here is going to, beat the drum here on having a standard, and so thinking about what the internal standard is for your operations, as I think we've all experienced, markets are incredibly different, and a lot of that sometimes can come from regulatory pressure. So in a market like California, where you have a distributor that has to deliver your product, those things can really break the standard. What I think about here, though, from a credit application is, to Rachel's point around documenting the digital and physical processes. There are solutions, as Joel kind of meant, that as the industry's matured, there are better and better solutions that are making this a lot simpler. Things that actually start to connect the data sets, things that can, in a more repetitive process, start to streamline that. Obviously, the preference is to have a standard and to get your partners to work with you as a best practice. As Joel, as they launched GPS One, I know there was and maybe Joel, you can spend a few seconds on this, but getting their customers to almost change over to leveraging the technology and the process there. I think there was a lot of heartburn, but as they flipped over, it almost created a better process and a better management. And so, to me, data can be objective. It doesn't tell a lie. And so, think about the data that you have to produce. If it's impacting your business around, variable costs of labor, in my experience, more often than not, if you have an objective data point to share with your partners and your retailers in this example, more often than not, they're human. And so they're like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense now that you explained that to me. We want to sell more of this. We want this to be faster for you. So let's actually have a productive conversation, leveraging the data to actually drive that.
Excellent. Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean,
Go ahead, Joel.
I was just going to say, yeah, I can touch on that point, because we initially we were a little apprehensive to go out to our customers and say, hey, we would like to build this for you. We'd like to, provide, this better software solution for you. But in order to get people on board, I literally had to go into the ground floors of our manufacturing partners and say, hey, I want to build this with you, with your team, and we can do this together because I need you guys to get on board with the process again, to create that positive downstream impact for my team so we're able to manage things a little bit easier. And then some of the things that we initially rolled out were sound very simple, but shipping labels that were QR coded that could be scanned every step in the process so we can track supply chain.
Yeah.
We integrated with Metric and figured out a solution to be able to build manifests where if you were using a transfers template and you didn't have the information from the top half of your manifest, how can you leverage our data to fill that out? Well, maybe that saves 2 or 3 minutes on every single manifest that gets created. Well, if you're creating 80 a day, that's a lot.
Yeah. Joel,
Um,
how many customers did y'all lose when you switched over?
None. I mean, I think we gained customers.
It's a
So,
bit in there. A little bit of lead
yeah.
question.
And look, we're not the cheapest ones out there, and we've maintained our customer base through our software solution and our customer service, and it's those two things that have really driven home for us and have really allowed us to stay as a bigger player in the market as we are.
Yeah,
But
and to that point, yeah, Andrew, I think having something like a unified product catalog to solve for SKU proliferation so that trade credits can actually line up. Yeah, having a national standard would be ideal. The reality of the situation we live in is it probably takes a little bit more effort to get there. But again, the solutions are changing. The speed of evolution is faster and faster. Yeah, give me a shout when we finish up here, and I'll spit some game.
Awesome, Dom. Well, from one player to another, there. Thank you again for taking the time today, everyone, for joining us. This is again our third installment. Coming up on April 15th will be our fourth installment of this tech series entitled The Frankenstein Tech Stack. Thank you for that title, David. The hidden cost and complexity of layering tools without cohesion. This session will examine how fragmented systems built out of short-term fixes or incomplete implementations introduce invisible costs, workflow confusion, and long-term barriers to scaling. So, tune in a month from now, just before our 420 holiday, and see the answer to the Frankenstein Tech Degree. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
thanks, guys.